He didn't leave as a pope, he left as a father, with a closing prayer that shook a world that was losing faith. No one thought Pope Francis's last moments would be so moving. There were no miracles or halos, just a weak body holding an old rosary and whispering. The world was shocked, and even his enemies bowed their heads. Not power, but the gap between the church and people had been broken. Why did he choose to leave in silence? We mean by leaving a word that made so many people cry. This is not just a story about leaving, it is the last song of a strong soul. Watch now, before everyone forgets one of the most important hours in faith's history. The mood in St. Peter's Square on April 2025 was different from any other Easter before. While the sky was clear, the bells tolled, and the square was full of religious people. There was a strong sense that something was very different. No one said it out loud, but everyone had a hazy sense that they were seeing something holy and final. Pope Francis didn't walk slowly like he usually does. Instead, he was sitting, quiet, and looked thinner than normal. After a bad case of bronchitis, everyone had been worried about his health for weeks. Even though he was released from the hospital, everyone knew he wasn't fully better. He was very brave to choose to be there, even if it was just to sit quietly and give the Urbi et Orbi gift to the city and the world. Surprisingly, Archbishop Diego Raleigh read the Easter message instead of the Pope this year, which was both sad and beautiful. He sat there with his hands on his knees and looked out at the tens of thousands of loyal fans waving flags. Tears came to his eyes, as if he knew this was the last time he would see his children. The message he had prepared this time wasn't just a formal liturgical talk, it was more like a spiritual vow than a speech. He started with the well-known words, "Christ is risen," but quickly changed the tone to something deeper, more intense, and touched with hopelessness. But there was also faith that hope is not an escape, but a challenge. It doesn't fool us, but gives us strength. That line had a soft but deep effect on the people who heard it. Many people thought that when the Pope looked out at the crowd with tears in his eyes, he knew that this was the last time he would stand in front of people and talk about what he had always lived for: hope. Not a sweet, unrealistic hope, but hope that had been tried by tears, war, and the world's lack of interest. Not stopping there, Pope Francis kept doing what he had always done as Pope. He stood with those who were on the outside. He talked about pregnant babies, elderly people who were left alone, refugees who were turned away, abused women, and people who society thought were useless. It was like he was making a last plea, like, "Please don't forget them if you want to remember me." For him, every life is valuable, even the life of a baby in the womb, and the lives of the sick and old, who are increasingly seen as things to be thrown away in many countries. Pope Francis didn't hesitate to name the wars in Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, and Congo, even though the whole world was in shock. He didn't pick nice words. He made a strong, almost desperate plea for peace out of boundless love. I want us to renew our hope that peace is possible. People say that their last words show what they care about the most. If that's the case, this is what Francis wanted everyone to remember in his last hours. When he was still strong enough to write a speech, he decided to talk about love, kindness, and a world without war and death. Many people in the Vatican had the idea that the Pope wrote the 2025 Easter message while he was in the hospital, coughing and being cared for by nuns. He may have even made changes to the first draft while he was sick and couldn't sit up straight. If that were true, then every word in that letter was not just words. It was his soul sent out into the world. The Pope put his hand to his chest as Archbishop Raleigh read the last piece. which was about how life wins over death. The camera caught the moment. His mouth moved as if he were praying as he looked off into the distance. A lot of people said he was saying, "Jesus, I trust you." No one could prove it, but everyone felt the same thing. The world was dead when a man was about to leave. When the reading was over, he slowly raised his hand to bless the people. It was a move he did all the time, but that day it felt heavier than ever. It wasn't because he was physically weak, but because he had been pope for so long. A lot of faithful people in the square knelt. Some people couldn't keep their tears from coming out. Let us entrust ourselves to him, for he alone can make all things new. That last line, the prayer, shut down the message, and maybe also Pope Francis's public life. Not only was it a celebration, but it was also a goodbye, and maybe everyone there felt that in their hearts that day. There wasn't a lot of noise when he left, but everyone couldn't keep quiet. In the early hours of April 21, 2025, on Easter Monday, millions of Catholics around the world were still enjoying the resurrection of Christ. The Vatican's old stone hallways were filled with the quiet news that Pope Francis had died. There were no parades, sirens, or bright lights when he left. He died the way he had lived, quietly, simply, and calmly. There was a death at 7:35 a.m. by Cardinal Kevin Fraile, the Camerlengo, who takes over as temporary leader of the Holy See when there is a void. Fraile talked to the reporters in a calm voice. At 7:35 this morning, Francis, Bishop of Rome, went back to the home of the Father. He had spent his whole life serving the Lord and his church. A short line, but it was enough for those who heard it to feel the huge loss. In the small room in Casa Santa Marta, the home Pope Francis had chosen from the start of his term as Pope, he quietly breathed his last. A lot of ideas went around about those last hours. According to reports inside the Vatican, around 5 a.m., the nuns who worked in the guest house in Santa Marta saw some strange signs. His heartbeat became weak and medicine didn't help. The medical team was called right away, but a later statement said that Pope Francis had a serious stroke and acute heart failure. The end was not surprising, but it still left people silent. The Pope had been in danger of dying before. A few months ago, he was treated for bilateral pneumonia, which is a serious problem that is especially dangerous for older people. During his 38 days in JLI University Hospital, his health was closely watched, but people inside the Vatican knew he was fighting for his life. He was sent home on March 23 and was said to be in a good state of health when he got back to Casa Santa Marta. From that point on, though, he was rarely seen in public except for the fateful Easter Sunday, April 20, when he sat alone on the balcony and gave someone else his last message to read. Some people say that Pope Francis didn't die suddenly, but over time. They say that he was mentally ready for this slow process for a long time. A long time ago, when he was healthy, he told America magazine, "I am at peace with whatever the Lord decides. I have always said when the Lord calls, I will go." And maybe the Lord did call him on Easter Monday, picking that day to bring his good servant home. Many people were moved by the fact that there were no groups of cardinals around him or loud prayers during his last moments. Instead, there were only a few close people with him, the nurses, the nuns, and the confessor. He had a small wooden cross put on his chest. Reports say that in his last moments, he didn't say much, but his hand was tightly gripping the rosary beads. It was said to be the rosary that his mother had given him when he was 7 years old. It was just a simple string of wooden beads that had been worn smooth over time, but it seemed to be connected to the Pope's soul, since he had spent his whole life praying for others. There were no recordings of Pope Francis's last words. and there was no public announcement of a last word like in a story. Someone who was with him at the hospital said that the last words he heard from Pope Francis were, "May they all be loved." That's it. No names, no countries, no subjects, just a simple plea, "May they all be loved." It was enough to quiet everyone who heard it. The whole world seemed to stop breathing at that moment. The bells at St. Peter's Basilica tolled slowly and deeply. The Vatican went into a state of sedicante, which is one of the holiest and most serious times in the Catholic Church's history. As soon as they started, the usual ceremonies began. This small room in the Pope's apartment was locked up. As a way to confirm history, the Cardinal Cameo put the seals on the door. Many people saw Pope Francis's death not as the end, but as the end of a journey of faith. During his more than 12 years as Pope, he lived like a shepherd who smells like his sheep. He was easy to talk to, kept things simple, and never put himself above others. He chose to leave the world in the same way now. Nobody said goodbye or held a ceremony. There was just a quiet return like a prayer, and for the billions of people who were sad about his death, it wasn't because he was dead. It was because they knew that in a noisy world, a man who always chose silence to listen to love had just died. A lot of people still remember the day, March 13, 2013, when white smoke rose from the Sistine Chapel's chimney, marking the start of a new age for the Catholic Church. No one thought the man named that day would be Jorge Mario Bergoglio, an obscure Argentine bishop, and even fewer thought he would choose the name Francis, which has never happened before in the history of the Pope. But that shock was the start of a journey of deep kindness and change. Francis, a name that makes me think of St. Francis of Assisi, who gave up wealth to live with the poor, showed that he wanted a different kind of church, one that was smaller, less fancy, and more involved. A lot of people thought that picking this name was also a quiet attack on the Vatican's long-standing conservatism. From that point on, he was more than just the Pope. He was the live example of a deeply humane change. When he became Pope, Pope Francis quickly turned down the offer to live in the Apostolic Palace, which had been the home of popes for hundreds of years. He instead picked a small room in Casa Santa Marta, which was the home of priests and visitors. This wasn't just a show of respect, it was a statement. I am one of you. From that lowly position, he led one of the biggest religious groups in the world, with a budget of billions of euros and power around the world. Not only was his home simple, but so was his whole way of life. He carried an iron cross instead of a gold one, called the Faithful by name, drove a Ford Focus instead of a limousine, and often left the Vatican to go to jails, refugee camps, and hospitals. Many people around the world will never forget the pictures of the Pope washing the feet of refugees, hugging disabled people, and talking to poor people. But there was a strong and brave spirit of change hidden behind the image of a kindly father. Francis didn't avoid tough topics like the Vatican's budgets, the problem of sexual abuse, women's rights, climate change, migration, and unfair wages. He set up an independent financial council, made Vatican organizations be open about how much money they spent, and looked into corruption that had been going on for decades. Money has to serve, not rule, he said one time. That was an honest, almost revolutionary comment in a field that has long been linked to power and money. He was also the first pope to put women in high roles in the Vatican. For example, Barbara Giotto was the first woman to lead the Vatican museums, and Sister Natalie Beckhardt is the Undersecretary of the Senate of Bishops. Some conservative bishops were against these choices, but Pope Francis stood firm. Others thought he had carefully planned each step, making sure they were strong enough to make change, but not so strong that they would break up the church. Of course, no one can be in charge without being criticized. People said he was too forgiving and forward-thinking. There were even bishops who publicly questioned his authority. But it's strange that Francis never replied back. He didn't say anything and kept working and meeting with people. As an experienced reporter for La Repubblica once put it, he has the patience of a monk and the stubbornness of a prophet. People still remember his 2015 speech in the U.S. quite clearly. Martin Luther King Jr. was mentioned in the U.S., who stood for faith, justice, and freedom like Dorothy Day, Abraham Lincoln, and Thomas Merton. It was more than just a speech. It was the start of a reign based on kindness. A lot of people thought Francis wanted to step down like Benedict XVI did, and some insiders said he had thought about going back to Argentina to live alone. But until the end of his life, he did not move. He kept writing, celebrating Mass, and being present because, as he once said, shepherds cannot abandon their sheep. And now that he is returned to the Lord, what remains is not a list of titles or material accomplishments, but the changes that were made that can't be undone. The millions of people whose faith was renewed through a look, a smile, and a handshake. That legacy. A pope who didn't sit on a chair but came down to walk among his people may live on in the minds of those he loved and in the hearts of those who used to think the church was far away, but now see it as close as a father, brother, or friend. When word spread that Pope Francis had died early on April 21, 2025, people all over the world were sad and thought of him. People who aren't Catholic, political and religious leaders, and people from all over the world showed respect for a pope who was seen as a model of kindness and humility. Speaking on Truth Social, President Trump said, "Rest in peace, Pope Francis. May God bless him and all who loved him." Former President Joe Biden called him one of the most important leaders of our time and praised his unwavering work for social justice and the poor. In Europe, Prime Minister Keir Starmer of the UK praised the Pope for being a brave and humble leader during hard times. King Charles III told him how much he admired his work to bring people of different religions and groups together. French President Emmanuel Macron talked about the Pope's job to bring joy and hope to those who are suffering and said that he hoped this hope would last forever. In Asia, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi called the Pope an example of kindness, humility, and spiritual strength. He also thanked the Pope for loving the people of India. President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine remembered how the Pope could bring comfort and hope through prayer and unity. Russian President Vladimir Putin sent his deepest sympathies and praised the Pope's work to bring the Russian Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches together. In Africa, Mahmoud Aliyu Faye, chairperson of the African Union Commission, praised the Pope's unwavering dedication to the region, especially his work to give voice to those who don't have one, promote peace and reconciliation, and stand with those who are hurt by war and poverty. In Oceania, Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister of Australia, said that the Pope was like a loving and devoted father to all Catholics, and that Australians of all religions would mourn his death. In Latin America, Argentine President Javier Milei said he was very sorry about his countryman's death and praised his important work for peace and justice. A lot of other heads of state in the area sent their respects, and many were planning to attend the funeral. Pope Francis was praised and respected by people all over the world, from faithful Catholics to people of other faiths. In St. Peter's Square at the Vatican, a lot of people came to pray and remember him. A lot of people brought flowers, candles, and pictures of the Pope to show how much they loved and respected him. As of April 21, 2025, when Pope Francis died, a new part of the history of the Catholic Church began. This was notable not only because a beloved pope died, but also because of the strange choices he made about his funeral and where he would be buried. Pope Francis has asked that he be buried at the Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome instead of Peter's Basilica, as is the norm. Since Pope Leo XIII in 1903, this is the first time in more than 100 years that a pope has decided to be buried somewhere other than the Vatican. This choice shows how much he loved the Virgin Mary and the Salus Populi Romani icon, which is a picture of the Madonna, that he often visited before and after every foreign trip. The funeral for Pope Francis is set for April 25th to April 27th, 2025, and many religious people and world leaders are expected to attend. Before that, his body will rest in peace in his private chapel at Casa Santa Marta, where fans can visit and pray. Following that, the body will be taken to St. Peter's Basilica so that people could continue to see the body before the official burial mass. One unique thing about Pope Francis's funeral is that he will be buried in a simple wooden box, which is a reflection of the simple life he lived all his life. It will be buried directly in the ground inside the Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore. The coffin will have no fancy decorations on it. It will just say Franciscus. This is a big change from the triple coffins, wood, zinc, and precious wood, that have been used in previous papal funerals. As is customary, a small bag will be put inside the coffin before it is sealed. It will contain coins made during his time as pope and a short account of his rule. They will read this statement out loud before putting it in a tube the shape of a cone and then into the box. This will serve as a record of the important events in his rule for future generations. There will be official 9 days of sadness in the Catholic Church after the funeral. This is called the Novem Diale. Services and prayers will be held all over the world at this time to remember and celebrate Pope Francis's life and work. After that, the College of Cardinals will hold a conclave to choose a new pope, whose job it will be to lead the Catholic Church around the world. Pope Francis chose the Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore as his final resting place. This was not only his personal choice, but also a sign of the changes and improvements he made to the Church. He once said, "Mary, Mother of God, has always been in charge of my life and my work as a priest and bishop. So I hope that when I die, my body will rest at the Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore until I rise again." This choice also shows how much he loved the Virgin Mary and how close he was to the community of believers. One of the 4 main basilicas in Rome is the Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore, which he often went to pray. The fact that he was buried there shows that he wanted to stay close to the community and keep helping people even after he died. People will always remember Pope Francis for the changes he made and the important choices he made, but also for the love, kindness, and humility he showed during his life of service. For many, his final resting place at the Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore will be a holy place where they can remember and pray for a pope who did his job well. There were no big rituals or showy goodbyes for Pope Francis. He left in peace, but it was that simplicity that silenced the world, as if everyone bowed down to something greater than religion. A tradition of deep kindness. He once said, "The church is not a museum for saints, but a hospital for sinners." This saying struck a chord with millions of believers and became a powerful statement of his mission to build a church with open doors that welcomes everyone and doesn't judge them. Today, the world is split into pieces by hatred, politics, and a cold lack of interest in anything. He did something that not all religious leaders are brave enough to do. He went outside the old stone walls of the Vatican to touch the people who were covered in the dust of the world. He got down on his knees to wash the feet of prisoners, welcomed refugees, and heard the words of people who had been forgotten by society. There were no cameras or PR statements, just a heart that wanted to learn, love, and heal. Many people thought that he was torn between the strict rules of the Vatican and his own desire for change. But if that was true, he did not take the easy way out. He dedicated himself, and by doing so, he left a mark that can't be erased. When it comes to Pope Francis, what he left behind is not a statue, but every small act. A poor neighbor in Nairobi getting clean water, a Syrian child being saved from a refugee boat, and a nun in Bolivia feeling heard. These are the figures that are alive, and they will last. His funeral is not the end, but the start of a calling that all of us, believer or not, can live with. The spirit of Francis, who was bravely humble, lovingly kind, and true to the truth. After the people leave the square, the TV shows end, and the Vatican slowly gets back to its normal schedule, one thing will still be there. The last words are not in his mouth, but they are in everything he does. One of his followers wrote that he taught louder with quiet than with words, so he didn't have to say much. He was a guide in a skeptical age and a lighthouse in the storm of faith. He showed that power and humility can live together, and that faith is not a chain but a doorway to love. He is now taking a break, but his word still rings out. May they all be loved. The world may now understand why he was called the Pope of the Heart from that simple, plain, and theologically straightforward quote.